Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're going to be doing a painting based on the Sonic 2 level, Emerald Hill Zone. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. Now to start with, I've gone ahead and drawn a sketch out in my sketchbook. I do this for a few reasons. Sometimes I do it to try and figure out where I want things to go. It helps me figure out my composition ahead of time so I'm not making it up 100% as I go. So it also shows me where I'm going to be starting. So I need to start by drawing in my horizon line up here and transferring that to my canvas. Because it's the furthest thing away, the first thing I need to do is fill in my sky. So I've mixed up a blue and I took my cyan blue, mixed a little bit of orange in it because it was just too bright. It was going to stand out too much. I added a little bit more red to turn it a little violet, and then I darkened it with just a touch of my black. So this is what I'm going to use to fill in my sky. And I'm just going to save all the paint off of my palette knife and go ahead and fill this in. Now in these painting videos, I always mean to talk about why I've picked certain games, and I always want to pick games that are important to me or games I've played, so I at least have a good knowledge of them. Now, Sonic 2 was the first game I owned. A long time ago, my dad came home with a Genesis, and I don't even remember why. I don't think it was any birthday, it wasn't Christmas. He just brought one home, and it came with Sonic 2, so it was my first game I actually owned. And I tried so hard for many years to beat it. I didn't even beat it all the way until high school, and it was a great game because my sister could have the second controller and help me with Tails, and she loved playing as Tails, even though Tails would just do a few of the things, hit a few of the bosses sometimes, and hit Robotnik, so she'd help me out with that because Tails kept coming back and wouldn't die. And I liked it because as the older sibling, she couldn't hurt my character in any way, but she could still help. We did play co-op a lot, and sometimes when we get back together we'll play through it again, we'll play through some of our other games. But Sonic 2 was the first game we had, so it's very important to us. Now that the blue is dry, I'm going to go ahead and start filling in some of my sky objects. There's a giant cloud over here I'm going to be putting in, and one of those really far away islands back here. So I'm going to draw those in with a Conte crayon, and then I'll start painting them. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in my cloud. I'm using titanium white, and I'm just kind of filling in these cloud shapes that I drew with my chalk pastel. And I'm going to be bringing in some of the shadows and the highlights on the clouds with my cyan blue, but I'm going to wait till I have all the cloud in first. Now that I've done that, I have my cyan blue on a smaller brush, but I'm just going to be bringing in some of the values on all my clouds. So I'm just going to kind of bring in some of the blue on the edges, go back into my titanium white, and then just kind of make a nice little tiny transition between the two. That may have been too much. So I used my palette knife to scrape some of that blue paint off, repainted it. I had some blue on my brush, I'm not super concerned about it. While that's kind of doing its thing, I'm just going to switch over and work over here. To blend this in, I've taken a little bit of my Soft Body Zinc White, and I'm going to be just kind of filling in on top of this blue, because it's kind of harsh. So it's going to kind of tone that down, just make it a little softer. The clouds are alright. There's a few things in here I need to fix, namely this little bubble here. It's too wet. Every time I start to paint in it, the blue shows through. So I'm going to let that dry and then bring some more titanium white on top. In the meantime, I'm going to go over to this island. The orange I used to tone down my sky color earlier, I'm going to use to start bringing in some of those mountainous pillars. I also have some burnt sienna to bring in the shadows, and I'll use some white to bring in the highlights. I started to paint the orange on the blue, and it's just too transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and lay down white first, just to give it a solid base I can paint on later. Now the way I'm painting this faraway island is I've sort of filled in orange first, then I'm taking burnt sienna, and just on a couple of these long spires I'm just drawing a couple dark brown lines. Then I'm grabbing a little bit of titanium white and just doing the same thing, just a couple lines. Then I'm just kind of taking my brush and just kind of blending it all together, but not too much. Next up, there's some green hills below that island, and they just kind of have little bumps throughout here, so I'm going to start by filling that in white, and then later I'll paint it green. While I'm waiting on that stuff to dry, I've gone ahead and started trying to figure out my ocean color. This is cyan by itself, and I'm not super fond of it. I don't think it works really well. I think it's going to be really good for Sonic himself, but I think this will work a lot better for the ocean, and that's just cyan with some whites. To finish off the ocean, I've actually ran out of the color I needed, and I tried mixing it up and it got light, and I could sit there and try and fix it, but I decided a nice gradient might be really good. So I'm going to use this slightly lighter blue I made, and I'm just going to fade it up into that ocean color. For these hills, what I'm doing is I started by painting them solid green on top of that white I had done before. Then I took a little bit of blue-green and kind of laid that down along the horizon. Now I'm taking some yellow just to lighten up the tops of all those hills. The next thing I need to do is use my chalk to start drawing in my cloud reflection and where the hills come in at the bottom of the ocean. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and fill in these front hills white, just so the blue doesn't get into that green later. So I tried filling in the cloud reflection, and I was having a little bit of trouble. I had used zinc white and it just looked too chunky, it wasn't really sitting nice on the canvas. So I just put some titanium white over that. I'm gonna let that dry before I decide what I'm doing next. Over here for the reflection for the island, I'm just kind of using an orange, green, brown color to fill that in. And then I'm gonna use kind of just a little bit of green up there. And after that dries, I'll decide how I'm treating that. Now I had mentioned I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with the reflections, so I decided I'm going to use my glazing liquid, and I'm just going to mix that in with some cyan just to kind of make it a bit more transparent. So I have some of that right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint over everything just so it looks like it's in the water, so it's slightly blue. Next up, there's a little sand pit in the hills, and I'm going to go ahead and paint that before I start moving on to the green. So I'm just going to try and get this drawn in with blue until I'm happy with the shape. As for the colors of the sand pit, I'm going to start by painting it orange, and it's kind of more of a yellow orange I have here. This is going to kind of be my highlight, and then I have burnt sienna to mix in for the shadow. For the hills, I've mixed up kind of a medium green that's somewhere between yellow and blue. And I'm going to be using yellow and blue themselves to bring in the shadows and the highlights of the hills I've already filled in, and then some of the other ones that you quite don't see the tops of because they're somewhere in this mess. While those hills are drying, the next thing I need to do is bring the highlights on the water. I have the reflection and I've kind of toned that down with the blue glaze, but now I need to bring in the highlights. So I have zinc white, I've mixed my heavy body with my soft body. What I'm going to do is right along the horizon, I'm just going to start to lay this in. And it's supposed to be quite transparent because I want to see the blue underneath. I'm just going to lay that in all the way across, and I didn't go all the way up because I was scared of actually going over the top. So I'm just going to go around the edges, and then I'm just going to fade that downwards. Now to start working on the hills. I have a yellow green, and I'm just going to bring in some of the highlights across the tops of those hills. And then I also have a blue-green to bring in some of the shadows on the opposite side. So I filled in the hills, and I'm not super happy with them. They just don't look really good. I really like the sand trap, and I'm happy with everything else. So while I sort of think about what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by bringing in a little bit more highlights into the ocean, just using pure titanium white. And in using that, I'm just going to bring a couple little, basically parts where the sun is just glittering off the surface. Just so there's a little bit more highlight and a little bit more character to it. In order to fix up the hills, I've mixed up the following colors: a medium green, a yellow green, and a blue green, which is what I had before, except I had done the medium green, let it dry, then I had tried to do the light and the dark, and it really just didn't work out. So I'm going to try and do them all at once, all together, and hopefully they'll look a bit more natural this time. Those hills are looking a lot better. Now I'm going to use my leftover green colors just to fill in the bottom. In the game there's this like weird, if you've ever seen one of those 3D eye things where you kind of focus your eyes somewhere else and you see a picture, that's what that little strip at the bottom is going to remind me of. So I'm just going to use my different greens and just kind of try and fill in some sort of pattern-esque texture. Using all my greens, I may bring in some more yellow, some more white, but I'm going to stick in that green color palette. Now that I've finished all of the background, it's time to do the foreground. I'm going to start by using my Conte crayon, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw that all in before I start painting. For the background, I'm going to be starting with the brownish orange color. Then I'll move to the grass itself. Because once it's in front of the other, it's just easier for me to start with this down here. So I've mixed up a few colors. I have burnt sienna, I have pure orange, I have orange with a little bit of blue, I have a little bit of red left, a little bit of black, and then some white. So I'm going to be using mostly that brownish orange I have to fill in, and I'm going to be using the lighter orange as my highlights, white for anything that's super bright, and then I'm going to be using the burnt sienna for shadows and the black for anything that's super dark. So I'm really struggling with how I was going to paint these blocks. I went ahead and I tried to do it in paint, didn't like it, so I just filled everything in orange, and now I've taken that white chalk and then I've just gone and marked everything in with a ruler. Now I'm going to take a light tan orange color, burnt sienna, and then I kind of have this medium shade again, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in where I've made these chalk lines. The bricks have been coming along really well. I finished them all up except this checkerboard, and this one will need some highlights in a bit once it's a bit drier. How I did that is I had said I had my highlight and my shadow. My highlight was a light tan and my shadow was burnt sienna. So I kind of did all the highlights on the tops and the left, let them dry, erased the chalk, and then I brought my shadows in with my burnt sienna on the left and the bottom, just kind of trying to make that cube. So they've come out really nice, they look really 3D. So I'm just going to finish up this checkerboard, add some shadows here. I'm just going to use kind of a watered down brown, and then I'm going to use a watered down white to bring in that highlight. So I finished all my blocks. The last thing I have to do is erase the chalk in the checkerboard and then bring in some shadows there, because everything looks really three-dimensional around it and it just kind of gets sunk in and just looks really flat compared to the rest of those blocks. Now that the blocks are all done, I need to add in the shadows for the grass. So what I've done is I've mixed up some acrylic glazing liquid with some Mars Black, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the first shadow, and there's going to be two. This one that's a bit more transparent, and then there's going to be one that's just solid Mars Black without the glazing liquid. Once that first shadow is done, I'm taking straight black, and it's a lot more opaque, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of fill in the heart of the shadow with that. Next, I'm going to block in where the grass goes, so I just have some titanium white, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in exactly where the grass is going, so I have kind of a good idea, and then it's filled in so it's not showing anything through. Now that this looks like a winter wonderland, I'm going to grab my darker green I've made and sort of fill in alternating for the grass all the way through the entire thing. Did I say I was going to grab the darker color? Well, turns out on top of the white it looks a lot lighter than it actually was. So now I've mixed up an even darker color, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in between where I've done the lighter color. Before I move on to the next thing, I'm just going to get rid of some of this little bit of extra chalk that's on the edge, just so it's all cleaned up and it doesn't cause me any trouble later. Now that that's cleaned up, it's time to draw the last few things in with the chalk. Now that I've finished drawing, it's time to start painting. And I've already tried my color on the backside of Tails, and it's way too transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in all the parts that are that yellow-orange first with white, let them dry, and then they'll be painted yellow-orange. So I've been working on Tails. I used that yellow-orange color to fill in most of his body, except his face. I wanted to skip that and make sure I got that right. So I did everything else besides anything that was not yellow-orange. I used magenta to fill in some of the shading. So I laid down some of the magenta, picked up more yellow-orange, and just kind of softened that transition. Now I'm going to jump back down to the Stargate and use some yellow and use some red to start to fill in some of the base colors for this. So I've worked on the checkpoint a bit. I filled in everything that was the yellow. I'm going to let that dry because I really like what I've done and I don't want to mess it up. So I'm going to jump back to working on Tails. I'm going to fill in all the yellow of his face with white, let it dry, and then do the same thing I did for his body but for his face this time. Moving on to Sonic, I'm going to paint everything that's blue white first, just like I had done with Tails and like I had done for some of this, so I have a nice base and the green's not going to show through and contaminate my blue color. Now while that's drying, I still have one more thing to do. I had drawn in some smoke because he's running and because he's Sonic and obviously he's fast. So I'm just going to go ahead and start filling this in white. And this may need a second coat later, so it's good that I'm doing it now because I can jump back and forth between the smoke and then where Sonic is. Now I'm using my cyan to fill in Sonic, and my cyan is a little bit patchy, but I wanted to give it a first coat of cyan. Now I'm going to bring in some shading with my second coat using black, white, and I have a little bit of red just to use a little bit of violet in some of the shadows so they're a little bit deeper. So I finished filling in all of the blue that is Sonic, and I had filled his arms in originally, and it occurred to me they're not actually blue. So I painted them white. I'm going to let them dry before I move on to any more of Sonic's actual body parts. So I'm going to fill in the smoke with another coat of white and use a little bit of gray just to add a little bit of value and a little bit more to that smoke. Moving back to Sonic, I'm going to start with his feet first. So I'm going to fill in his socks solid white and then give them value, and then I'll move on to his shoes. Now I've mixed up a peachy color for like his face, his belly, and his arms, but like before I need to go ahead and fill in white first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and once that's dry I'll put the peachy color on top. Now that I've finished painting Sonic, I just need to fill in these rings I've drawn. So I'm going to give them a base coat of white first, and then I'll paint them gold. And we're done. We have Sonic and Tails running through Emerald Hill Zone from Sonic 2. If you're interested in this piece, you can bid on this original canvas or buy a printer poster. There's links below. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.